There are a few things you can count on in the brownstone on West 35th. Nero Wolfe won't get out of his chair unless the walls are on fire. The orchids upstairs get more affection than I do, and the front door rarely opens before noon unless someone's already dead or about to be. So when the bell rang at precisely 10:41 that Thursday morning, I figured we had ourselves an early bird with a worm problem. Fritz poked his head in from the hall and gave me that look that means I'll answer it if you don't, which, in brownstone parlance, is practically a brawl. I waved him off and got it myself. She was tall in a way that made you forget the word tall meant anything to do with inches. Long coat, plum-colored scarf, gloves like they cost more than my rent, and a voice like smoked honey. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. "That's what it says on the business cards," I said. "Come in. You're either very early or very late, but either way, you're now part of my morning." She followed me in with a kind of glide that didn't quite match the stress lines around her eyes. She looked like a woman who had money and the habits that come with it. I led her into the front room. Wolfe was, of course, upstairs with the orchids, his usual 9 to 11 ritual, sacrosanct and uninterrupted unless the police came with a warrant or a bomb. I offered her a chair, which she accepted with the sort of grace that said she was used to people doing everything for her, including believing what she said. "Need help? But I'm afraid you won't believe me." "Then let's start with what you want me to believe," I replied. "We can worry about the truth after lunch." That got me the faintest trace of a smile. Score 1 for charm. "I believe someone is trying to kill me," she said. I kept my eyebrows steady and my voice casual. "That's not very original. Mrs. Lyell happens more often than you'd think in this city. Usually, though, they try once and don't follow up, which, as always, meant I'm not sure if I should tell you everything yet. Try me. Had big name in imported silks and high-end linens. Had a townhouse on 74th and a mistress in Chelsea. Dropped dead in his office of what the coroner called an embolism and what the tabloids called poetic justice. He'd been buried 6 months and still made page 6 more often than most living people. I live alone now," she went on. "Or rather, I thought I did. Things have started appearing, moved books, unlocked doors I distinctly remember locking. The sort of thing that could be explained away, but I can't explain it. And this all started recently." She nodded. "About 3 weeks ago." She opened her purse and pulled out a small envelope. No return address, just her name in a hand that looked elegant and antique. The way invitations to a séance might be written. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single card. No note, no signature. Just 2 words, printed in neat indigo ink. "Lavender room." I blinked at it. "That mean anything to you?" It was a private room in our house. Theodore had it built in the basement. It was locked after his death. No one but him had the key. He used it for his work. What kind of work requires a private lavender room in a basement? But I had the lock changed after he passed. There's no reason that card should exist, let alone arrive in my mail. I looked at her again, more carefully this time. Her hands weren't shaking. Her eyes were clear, even if tired. She wasn't hysterical, not even scared, really. She was furious, and that, in my book, meant she might be telling the truth. "Let me guess," I said. "You went down and checked, and the room was unlocked. "No," she said. "I was too afraid to. That surprised me. But I did call a locksmith. He came this morning. He opened it, and the door had not been forced. The keyhole was untouched, but everything inside the room had been rearranged just enough to be noticed." She paused, and her voice dropped a notch. There was also something left behind, something that wasn't there before. I waited. A single lavender stem, fresh, laid across the chair where Theodore used to sit. Now that made the hairs on the back of my neck consider a career change. At that moment, Wolfe came thundering down the stairs, or rather, what for him passes as thunder, slow, measured footfalls with a scowl. He appeared in the doorway, a folded newspaper in one hand and a grimace in the other. "Archie," he said, "either you've left the boiler running or we have a visitor." I rose. "Mr. Wolfe, may I present Mrs. Dana Lyle?" Wolfe barely nodded. "I regret the inconvenience. I am unavailable. She believes someone may be trying to kill her," I said. He halted, eyes narrowing. "Do they intend to do it?" "With Lavender. She's not joking." Mrs. Lyle stood, perfectly poised. "I was told you solve problems no one else can. If I was mistaken, I'll go." Wolfe gave her a slow, appraising look. "That depends, madam. Do you want me to believe you, or are you hoping I'll prove you wrong?" Mrs. Lyle's face didn't move. "Does it matter if you find the truth?" Artistry of Nero Wolfe saying no. You'd have to watch him do it about a dozen times, to everyone from weeping widows to city commissioners. The man had raised refusal to a theatrical form, and he didn't waste any of his prime material on Mrs. Lyle. He waited until she was seated in the red armchair, the edges of her coat. Then he settled into his throne behind the desk, like a Roman emperor receiving tribute from the provinces. He steepled his fingers, which is usually a sign that he's about to reject something with precision. "And then," began madam, he said, "you have come here with an envelope, a flower, and a feeling. That is all." Mrs. Lyle didn't blink. "I came here with the memory of my husband's death, and the suspicion that someone thinks it wasn't enough." Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a sound like a soft growl. "I do not work on suspicion. I do not peddle in riddles. I do not care for ghosts, symbols, or sentimental poisonings. If someone has tried to kill you, you should be under police protection, not here." "They won't act," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "There's been no threat, nothing they can prove. They think I'm grieving." "Are you?" Wolfe asked. "Not in the way they think." It was the sort of line that could have meant anything or everything. Wolfe didn't flinch, but I noticed the way he studied her, the slight parting of her lips, the way her eyes never left his, the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't trying to charm him. She was daring him. But Wolfe wasn't having it. "I do not allow my schedule to be disrupted on the basis of commotional distress. Mr. Goodwin may assist you in contacting a reputable detective agency that specializes in the nervous and the aggrieved. I do not." I turned in my chair just enough to catch her expression. It didn't change, but something behind it did. "Final?" she asked, rising smoothly. "Regrettably," Wolfe replied, "yes. For what it's worth, Mr. Wolfe, my husband, used to say that no man who spent his life with flowers could ever truly understand the rot that lives in people that stopped him. Only a flicker, but I saw it." She walked out without waiting for a reply. The silence after she left was its own kind of accusation. I waited a beat, then said, "Well, that was fun. Do we send her a card when the murder happens, or just flowers?" Wolfe shot me a look. "She wasn't lying," I said. "Not about everything." Wolfe opened his newspaper. "You are confusing composure with credibility. She has no evidence, no crime, and no proof of peril. She has a locked room someone entered, and a flower from a man who's been dead 6 months. That's not a puzzle, it's a metaphor," he growled. "And I abhor metaphors before lunch." I stood. He didn't answer, which, if you know Wolfe, is practically a confession. The rest of the morning unfolded like a silent duel. I filed paperwork. He read. Fritz brought in coffee and toast, while Wolfe sat in the office, tapping a finger against his chair's armrest in a rhythm that suggested something was burrowing into his brain and trying to rearrange the furniture. Around 1 o'clock, I dropped a folder on his desk, casually, of course, containing a short summary of Dana Lyle's late husband and his business affairs. All public record, but enough to poke a few questions. Wolfe didn't look up. "Did you find anything salacious?" "Depends on your definition." Lyle's company used to run boutique imports, fine fabrics, mostly Italian and Indian. Then, about 3 years before he died, he started buying up old properties, warehouses, basements. One of them had a rumored connection to the opium row raids back in the 40s. Wolfe grunted. "Oh, and the Lavender room," I added. "It was apparently referenced once in a private journal of one office suppliers. Code word for something shady. No one ever confirmed what." Now Wolfe did look up, slowly, like a bear stirring in winter. "Phewie," he muttered. "Archie, you are a wretched instigator. I live to serve." He tapped the armrest again. "You believe she is in danger. Believe someone wants her to think she is, and that someone has a key to a room they shouldn't." He sighed and rubbed his temples. "Very well, you may make inquiries, but do not promise anything on my behalf." I grinned. "Around, I am not," he snapped. "I am tolerating." That afternoon, I took a cab to Mrs. Lyle's address, a tall, gray structure on the Upper East Side that looked like it had once hosted quiet scandals and louder parties. I didn't expect her to be home, but she was dressed now in soft, gray slacks and a silk blouse, a little less guarded. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't say I wouldn't." "Did Mr. Wolfe send you?" "He sent me the way a man throws away a letter and then asks where it landed." She smiled at that, then gestured for me to follow her down the stairs. I haven't been back down since this morning. The basement hall was lit with old gas-style sconces that gave off more mood than light. At the end was a pale lavender door. She unlocked it, and we stepped inside. The room was small, maybe 15 feet across, but immaculate. Bookshelves, a writing desk, and a single velvet chair in the center. On the desk, neatly placed, was the lavender stem. It looked fresh, too fresh. "I didn't touch it," she said. "I wanted you to see it exactly as I found it." I stepped closer. There was no dust around the chair, no footprints on the rug. Whoever had been here had been careful, but not careful enough, because someone had lit a candle in the room recently and forgotten to snuff it out completely. A faint line of soot trailed up the wall, ending in a swirl near the ceiling. "You ever burn candles down here?" I asked. "No." "Then we've got ourselves a trespasser. And either he's trying to send a message, or he's trying to open a conversation with the dead." She shivered. I straightened. pulling out my notebook. All right, Mrs. Lyell, let's find out who's talking. It was the kind of Tuesday that promised to behave: gray skies, steady chill, nothing too loud or too bright. I had just finished updating Wolfe's index of imported cheeses when the phone rang. Not the regular business line, mind you, the private line in the front hall. The one reserved for calls Wolfe preferred not to answer himself. I picked it up with my usual charm. Goodwin, investigations, solutions, and door-slamming dramatics. How can I help? There was a pause, then a man's voice, low and clipped. Is this Archie Goodwin? Unless I've had a personality transplant. This is Inspector Kramer. Is Wolfe there? He is? Do you want him, or are you calling to ruin my day? Another pause. Tell Wolfe there's been a murder. On East 89th, he'll want to hear the name. I scribbled a note while holding the phone with my shoulder. Shoot, Dana Lyell. That got me. I didn't bother knocking. I strode right into the office, where Wolfe was contemplating a plate of braised veal with an expression of religious devotion. Put down the fork, I said. Kramer just called. Wolfe growled. Is he dead? Not yet. But is that stopped him. He set the fork down, dabbed his mouth with his napkin, and said, Explain. She was found this morning, not long after I left her place. Basement door locked from the inside. No signs of struggle. No weapon. Just one dead woman and one lavender flower. He sighed heavily. I despise prophecy. Yeah, well, this one came with petals. Kramer met us at the scene. Wolfe doesn't like to leave the brownstone unless forced, and this counted. We took a cab that smelled like garlic and regret, and by the time we got to the Lyell residence, Wolfe was already grumbling about the weather, the sidewalk grit, and the price of second-rate tragedy. The house was cordoned off. Kramer was at the top of the stairs, looking like someone had replaced his morning coffee with a tax audit. You took your sweet time, he barked. Wolfe ignored the greeting. Tell me what you know. Kramer glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. You'll get the report like everyone else, but I won't read it like everyone else, Wolfe replied. That earned a grunt of reluctant agreement. Found her in the basement, Kramer said. Locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Nothing missing. No wounds. We're waiting on the me, but prelim suggests poison or nerve agent, something subtle. No visible trauma. Wolfe's brow furrowed. And the flower. Kramer nodded toward the evidence text. Another lavender sprig, placed on her lap, fresh. She didn't seem like the suicidal type, I added. She wasn't, Kramer agreed. But that doesn't mean someone didn't make it look tidy. We were allowed into the basement once the techs were done, snapping photos and whispering over test tubes. Wolfe didn't kneel, God forbid, but he leaned heavily on his cane and peered around like a judge at a talent show he didn't want to be at. I scanned the shelves, same books, same desk, but the chair was now occupied by the unmistakable stillness of a corpse. Dana Lyell was slumped slightly forward, her head tilted like she'd been trying to listen to something at the very end. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted and on, her lap resting perfectly parallel to the creases in her skirt, was the lavender stem. She was waiting for someone, Wolfe muttered. I turned. How do you figure? She dressed deliberately, he said. Notice the earrings, mismatched yesterday, aligned today, hair set, perfume applied. Not suicide, not surprise. A ritual she didn't know would kill her. Or One she was told would reveal something that gave me chills I didn't care for. Wolfe leaned closer. "Is it possible," he said softly, "that she was expecting her husband?" Back upstairs, Kramer pulled me aside. Wolfe had excused himself to the parlor, which meant he'd found an armchair with cushions stout enough to support his opinion of himself. "You brought this to me," Kramer said. "No," I replied. "This came to us, and I tried to hand it back. You were in this house yesterday, briefly. Did you see anyone else? Any signs of entry?" "No and no." He studied me with the kind of expression that usually precedes handcuffs. Then he sighed. "This is going to get messy. The Lyell estate has ties, money, real estate, charity, fronts. If this goes public, we'll have every headline from here to Jersey City asking what the hell happened in a room that smells like perfume and dead things." I patted his shoulder. "Good thing Wolfe likes messes. He just refuses to clean them up." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe didn't speak for 3 full hours. He disappeared into the plant rooms with Theodore, emerged only to ring for beer, and then summoned me after dinner. I found him in his chair, gazing at the ceiling like it owed him an apology. "She was murdered," he said. "Agreed. And whoever did it wants us to believe something more supernatural or symbolic is at play. I'm not seeing candles and chanting, but sure." He shifted his weight. The flower, the locked door, the silence of her last moments. It's a performance designed to make us focus on why she died like that, not who would benefit. I raised an eyebrow. "So what's next?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, slowly, he said, "We find the people who think they inherited something. Money. No secrets." The next morning, after Wolfe had downed his coffee and glared at his breakfast kippers like they had personally insulted him, I was dispatched. My mission: ask too many questions in too many places, make too many people uncomfortable, and gather enough scraps of story to fill Wolfe's teacup with something he could sip on without leaving the house. And so I found myself walking into the plush white-hand lilac lobby of the Lyell Foundation's headquarters. Just before 10 a.m., the receptionist was a sleek brunette with a jawline you could slice brisket on. She gave me a smile that said I either looked like trouble or like someone who wanted to buy an overpriced leather briefcase. "I was neither, Mr. Goodwin," I said smoothly, flashing my best polite but nosy grin. "Private inquiry on behalf of a legal matter regarding Dana Lyell. I'm hoping to speak with someone in-house about her recent professional contacts. That usually buys me a polite refusal. This time, it bought me an arched brow and a laminated badge. 3rd floor, she said. Ask for Mr. Felix Blaine." Felix Blaine, head of operations at the Lyell Foundation, looked like someone had stuffed a college professor into a tax attorney's suit. He had a receding hairline, steel-rimmed glasses, and a voice that made the word budget sound like a lullaby. She was the public face, he told me, adjusting the fountain pen on his desk as if it mattered. Charity, galas, social work committees. I handled the logistics, compliance, and coordination. How did she seem lately? He paused, busy, distracted. She'd come in at odd hours. She missed 2 board calls in the last month, completely uncharacteristic. Did she ever mention someone threatening her? Maybe a donor, a staff member, a ghost from her past. No threats, but she did seem ... burdened. She took long walks. Once I saw her standing outside the building at midnight, staring at the plaque like it meant something personal. I didn't interrupt. I jotted that down. What about the lavender? Blaine blinked. I'm sorry. She had a lavender sprig on her lap when she died. Same flower on her desk yesterday. Coincidence? His expression twitched, the kind of twitch that means no, but I wish it was. She used to say lavender reminded her of her grandmother, a scent of safety. I always assumed it was personal. Was there anyone in her circle who might use that, not as a comfort, but as a message? Now he looked genuinely disturbed. There's something else, he said, hesitating. She received a letter 2 weeks ago, handwritten, no return address. She didn't open it in front of me, but afterward she looked pale. She tore it into tiny pieces and burned them in the office fireplace. Did she say anything? Only one word. He found me. I left with more questions than answers and a growing itch at the back of my neck. Next stop, her apartment. Again, this time, with the keys kindly provided by Kramer, on the condition that I not screw things up any worse than usual. Wolfe had taught me a few things about observation. One of them, people always leave their truth where they forget to hide it. I scoured the place from top to toe, drawers, coat pockets, bookshelves, and behind every damn painting, and in the false bottom of a jewelry box, under the brooch and trinkets that screamed inheritance. I found a photograph. 2 people. Dana Lyell, 10 years younger, looking over her shoulder at a man half in shadow. Her expression wasn't love, it was wary, guarded, like she knew the camera could see something she was trying to forget. No date, no inscription, but tucked behind the photo, another note in handwriting that looked like it came from a fountain pen and a mind with regrets. It read, "You promised me silence. I won't ask again." I took the photo back to the brownstone, where Wolfe was conducting a mid-afternoon argument with Fritz over the proper garnishing of tarragon chicken. I interrupted with all the grace of a bowling ball at a ballet recital. "This," I said, handing over the photo and the note, "is either a clue or an invitation to dig up someone's past. Your call." Wolfe adjusted his glasses, looked at the photo, and didn't speak for a long moment. Then he tapped the note. "Do you see it, Mr. Goodwin? Other than someone who wanted Dana quiet, enlighten me. This is not a threat. It is a reminder. And people only write reminders like this to those they assume still care. So, ex-lover, partner, blackmailer, perhaps all three. But more importantly, someone who knows that Dana had secrets that could affect more than one reputation." He stood slowly, which in Wolfe's world was the equivalent of a fire alarm. "Summon the guest list." "Which one?" "All of them." By nightfall, we had the names. A former romantic partner turned business rival. 2 members of the foundation board who stood to gain influence after Dana's death, and a housekeeper who had recently disappeared, along with her employment records. And Wolfe had already started planning the gathering. Not a dinner this time, but something more austere. He said, "We will let them talk, Archie. That is how you catch ghosts. By letting them speak as if no one can hear, or until one of them panics and says too much." He nodded. "Even better. If you've ever seen a grizzly bear blink its eyes open after hibernation, irritated, ravenous, and aware that winter hasn't ended yet, then you've got a fair idea of Wolfe at breakfast the next morning." He said nothing as I laid out the photograph, the burned letter, quote, the night walks, the disappearing maid, and the creepy midnight lavender arrangements. But when I mentioned Dana's muttered, he found me. He finally set down his fork with the reluctant reverence of a man partying. With religion, he stared at the ceiling for a long second, then Fui, which, in Nero Wolfe's dialect, somewhere between I'm intrigued and the world is irredeemably idiotic, that he said, stabbing a corner of his scrambled eggs, is not the statement of a frightened woman. It is the confession of a careless one. Careless how? I asked, pouring my coffee. She believed she had escaped, and like all fools who escape, she mistook distance for safety. People like that rarely leave breadcrumbs behind, but they often forget who taught them to run. I didn't say anything. The fact that he was talking this early meant we had ourselves a live one. She was being blackmailed, I prompted. Possibly, but not for money. A person like Dana. Lyle doesn't burn threats. She documents them, files them, prepares insurance. No, she was being reminded, punished even, and then silenced, which leads us to Wolfe waved a hand like he was shooing a fly, but it meant go on. You have permission to summarize. For suspects, I said, 1 bitter ex, 2 politically ambitious board members, and 1 missing housekeeper, plus a maybe boyfriend with a poet's haircut who runs her favorite floral shop. Dismiss the florist, Wolfe said instantly. Anyone who handles lavender knows it is for remembering, not warning. Unless, of course, they're unusually clever. I paused. That was fast. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across his prodigious middle. Mr. Goodwin, clever people do not use symbolism unless they are certain their victim will interpret it correctly, and subtlety, real subtlety, is always wasted on revenge. That's almost poetic, I said. It's breakfast, he replied. Everything is poetic when I'm forced to eat while discussing murder. That afternoon, I paid a second visit to Dana's office. Felix Blaine wasn't there, but his secretary, Miss Carrington, was. She had the wary eyes of someone who kept too many secrets in too few locked drawers, and when I mentioned Dana's nightly walks, she stiffened like I'd kicked a memory. I once found her in the records room, she said, voice low, 10 at night, going through our old intake files from 1998, names of patients, most of them long dead or relocated. What was she looking for? She didn't say, but when I asked, she snapped. We made promises. I need to know if we kept them. I raised a brow. That sounds ... ominous. She looked haunted, Carrington said, like something was catching up. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was doing his best impersonation of a man preparing for war, silent, brooding, and surrounded by old files. From the Lyell Foundation's tax and public grant records, all acquired via his usual quiet channels, which I don't ask about unless I want my pay docked. I found something, he said, not looking up. In 1998, the Lyell Foundation ran a youth outreach program in Harlem. It ended abruptly. No records of where the participants went, no public accounting of the funds, no reports. Cover-up, I asked. Sloppy at best, criminal at worst. He looked up now, his eyes gleaming, and Dana Lyell was the junior administrator on record. So, the past finally showed up, I said, and someone made sure it never got the chance to talk. Worse, Wolfe murmured. Someone never left. Later that evening, Wolfe summoned Saul Panzer, Fred Durkin, and Ori Cather. The The 3 wise men of Wolfe's little private army. If one of them couldn't dig up the missing maid, then she'd either changed her face or grown a beard and joined a monastery. Wolfe gave instructions. Saul was to comb the city for any of the 1998 program participants. Fred was to find out who had written the Lyell Foundation's checks that year and who had signed off on closing the program. And Ori was going to flirt with the secretary. Wolfe claimed it was a waste of talent. I claimed it was efficient delegation. By 10 o'clock, Wolfe called me into the office. "I will take the case," he said formally. "We will charge our standard rate plus expenses. Inform Dana's estate executor that I am now retained. And tell Inspector Kramer that he's about to get annoyed. I asked that he may expect trouble, and there it was. Nero Wolfe, who hated motion, noise, and most of humanity, had taken the bait. The person who sent Lavender with Dana to her grave had just become a player in a game they thought they'd already won. They had no idea what they'd walked into, but Wolfe did, and that meant, by extension, so did I. IVE always said that every murder is a dinner party in disguise. You just need to seat the right people, set the right mood, and wait for someone to choke on the truth. Wolfe prefers verbal menus to actual menus when it comes to suspects. But I figured I'd do both, so while Fritz whipped up something with veal and lemon caper sauce in the kitchen, I went to work listing out our cast of characters. Let's run down the evening's rogues gallery. 1. Felix Blaine, position, Foundation Director, age 58, vibe, bureaucratic cobra with a dental plan motive, political scandal, money laundering notes, too polished, never says I don't know, and always 3 steps ahead of what you didn't ask. 2. Celeste Brand, position, head of donor outreach, age, mid-40s, vibe, widow meets war, widow classy but permanently smoldering motive, ambition, old rivalry, possibly blackmail notes, former close friend of Dana's, turned wary frenemy. She's hiding something, but it might be guilt instead of murder. 3. Dr. Alan Kroger, position, program designer, the 98 Youth Initiative, age, late 60s, vibe, retired but available, with a voice like chamomile tea, motive, potential scapegoat if truth got out notes. He left quietly 5 years ago. Quiet men often have the noisiest pasts. For Dottie Harris, position, housekeeper, Mia, age, 50s, vibe, missing motive, could be witness, could be cleanup crew notes, disappeared 2 days before Dana's death. That's either coincidence or choreography. 5. Owen Lang, position, floral designer, part-time poet, age, early 30s, vibe, sensitive soul with a 6-pack motive, unclear, could be a red herring, or just red roses notes, rumored to have been close to Dana in recent months. Loves Lavender. Once I had the list, I strolled into Wolfe's office, where he was lounging like a lion, with a subscription to the Times literary supplement. "I've got your suspects," I said, color-coded by motive, with side notes on which ones I wouldn't mind being stuck in an elevator with. "Spare me," Wolfe grunted. "Begin." I laid out the details, going down the list. Wolfe closed his eyes during the recap, either for concentration or because talking to me was as exhausting as orchids on a Monday. When I got to Dottie Harris, his eyelid twitched. "Find her," he said simply. "If she is dead, the matter is grave. If she is hiding, it is worse." "Why worse?" "Because it means she knows something." Everyone in this case knows something, I said. That's the problem. Wolfe opened his eyes. No, Mr. Goodwin. Most people only suspect, but knowing that demands silence, and silence must be bought. I made the rounds that day and the next. Celeste Brand was cool but polite, like a woman who's made peace with grief, but not with suspicion. When I asked about her friendship with Dana, she tightened like a drawstring. She and I had ... differences about the foundation's direction, but I never wished her harm. She served me tea in a porcelain cup, too fragile for a man in a hurry. Which was probably the point. You know who might have? I asked. I know that everyone loved Dana, she said, which means someone envied her enough to pretend. At Dr. Kroger's brownstone in Brooklyn, I was met by the man himself, tall, balding, and perpetually halfway through some sentence about social ethics. He looked at me as if he already knew I wouldn't understand his answer. The 1998 youth program, he said. We did our best, but best isn't always good enough. Mr. Goodwin, what went wrong? He hesitated. Too many moving parts. Not enough supervision. Some kids vanished off the rolls. No forwarding info. Dana was troubled by it. I know that. She never forgot. Do you? I forget nothing, Mr. Goodwin, he said softly. That's the curse. As I left Kroger's place, my phone buzzed. Saul Panzer had found Dottie Harris working under an alias at a nursing home in Queens, 2 counties and 1 emotional breakdown away from the Lyell Foundation. I met her there. She looked older than her age, eyes rimmed red, hands always moving like she needed to scrub something off. She knew, she whispered. Dana knew what they did. She was going to talk. I begged her not to, told her it wouldn't fix anything, but she said someone had to. Who's they? Don't ask me. I have a new name now. You tell Mr. Wolfe he was right. And you be careful. The ones who smile at you, those are the ones who already decided what you'll never find out. She wouldn't say more. She wouldn't even take the cab fare I offered. But Wolfe would have enough. He always did, back at the brownstone. I found him seated before an open folder of tax records, calmly sipping beer. You were correct, I said. Dana knew something about that program. Dottie Harris confirms it. Wolfe didn't even smile. Then, we must accelerate, he said. Arrange a luncheon. Invite the suspects. I wish to see them, not as they appear in reports or photographs, but as they perform under polite pressure. Soup or steak? I asked. Let Fritz choose, Wolfe murmured. But ensure there is lavender on the table. Let us see who flinches. I've always said a suspect with an alibi is like a poker player with mirrored sunglasses. They're just betting you won't call their bluff. The luncheon. The dining room was transformed. Fritz laid out silver cutlery with surgical precision, and lavender, as requested, bloomed in a porcelain vase at the center of the table. But the guests did. They arrived with varying degrees of nerves and niceties. Felix Blaine led the parade, punctual and polished, armed with a grin that probably closed a dozen fundraisers. He wore a navy 3-piece and a gold tie pin shaped like a hawk. Celeste Brand came next, late by exactly 4 minutes. Fashionable or strategic, I couldn't tell. She nodded stiffly to Blaine and didn't touch her glass of water. Dr. Kroger arrived last, apologetic and winded. The trains, he said. They don't run as they once did, said Be Seated. I played host, of course, poured drinks, kept small talk spinning like a roulette wheel. Wolfe waited, like a spider, watching the web tremble. It started, politely enough. Forks clinked, napkins unfolded. Then Wolfe asked, "Where were you at precisely 9:15 the evening Dana Lyell died?" No pleasantries, no warm-up act. The question dropped like a stone in a still pond. Blaine didn't miss a beat. "Home. I'd just finished a board meeting. That ran long. I have call records and a car service receipt." Celeste blinked. I was at the opera. A revival of La Traviata. I went alone. Did you speak to anyone?" "I knew." "Convenient," Wolfe murmured. Then came Kroger. He paused. "At the Fairchild Club, bridge night. Who did you play with?" "Unlikely," Wolfe said softly, "because Albert Eames died last spring, and Rosenthal was in Boston that week." Kroger stared at him, blood draining from his face, like a tub unplugged. "That's single quotes, as ... not possible." "You lied," Wolfe said, "and poorly." The table stiffened. Blaine looked down at his lamb. Celeste's fingers tensed on her fork. "I didn't mean," Kroger began. "It was bridge night. I was walking near there. I didn't want it to look unseemly." Wolfe's eyebrows crept upward. "And what would have appeared unseemly?" he asked. Kroger licked his lips. "I was near Dana's apartment. I walked by. I didn't go in." "But you didn't mention this before," I said, standing now. "I was afraid it would look like you killed her," I offered, "like I could have." We let him sweat for a minute or two longer before Wolfe rang for Fritz to clear the table. "Mr. Kroger, you will make a written statement here, in this house, in the presence of Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Parker, our notary." Kroger nodded slowly. "Should I call the police now or after dessert? Is not guilt. It is only the sound of truth attempting to breathe." Later that evening, I took a cab to Dana Lyell's apartment building and had a chat with the doorman. A couple bucks helped loosen the memory. "Dr. Kroger," he said. "Yeah, I remember him. Came by the night Ms. Lyell died. Said he was dropping. Something off." "What time?" "Little after 9. She buzzed him in. That was all I needed. I gave him my card and told him not to speak to anyone else until I said otherwise. He promised, but the way he folded the bill into his coat said otherwise." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room misting orchids. "It means he could be our man. Who else lies about being near a murder? Those who believe proximity is peril, those who misunderstand guilt, or those who are protecting someone. You think he's covering." "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that no man visits a dead woman without a reason, and no murderer invents bridge partners unless he's frightened of what the truth might imply." He tapped a watering can against the metal shelf. "Mr. Goodwin, let us now test the other's alibis thoroughly. If one crumbles, the pattern will emerge. You're betting on dominoes." "I am," Wolfe said. "And the lavender is beginning to wilt. That means we are close. You know, there's a difference between trouble you walk into and trouble that walks right up and shakes your hand." Next morning, when I paid a visit to Celeste Brand's studio, the woman painted like she was chasing ghosts, smears of shadow across bold color, with figures that looked like they might whisper if you stared long enough. "Anyone," I told her. "I wasn't anyone. I was me," that earned a sigh and a buzz of the intercom. Celeste met me in the gallery. She wore a linen jacket over what I assume was supposed to pass for casual disinterest. I told Mr. Wolfe everything I know, but I've found people often forget what they know until you ask them the right way. She raised an eyebrow. And your way is the right way. If not, it's at least the more charming. I asked her again about the opera alibi. She stuck to her story. Mezzanine, right? She went home in a cab, alone. Which cab company? I asked. She paused, just enough to let the lie bubble to the surface. I don't remember, ma'am, I said. You're an artist. Detail is your bread and butter, and you're a detective, she snapped. Which means you think everyone's hiding something. That's because they usually are. I left her in her paint fumes and headed downstairs. That's where the two men were waiting. They weren't the usual goons, too well-dressed, but their faces had that heavy, slab-like look, like they'd been carved from concrete and given just enough personality to take orders. One stepped in front of me, the other flanked the exit. You, Mr. Goodwin, the front one asked. Depends. Are you selling encyclopedias or religion? He didn't smile. We have a message. Off the case, the second one said. I straightened, groaning, but not folding. You gonna leave a business card too? No. Another punch, shoulder this time. Tell Wolfe to forget Dana Yell. Fellas, I grunted. You ever consider therapy? One of them smiled then, not with humor, but with satisfaction. Next time, it'll be worse. They left me leaning against the wall, breath wheezing like a broken accordion. I stayed that way for a minute, partly because it hurt, and partly because if I didn't, I might have chased them just to make a point, and ended up face down on the sidewalk. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe didn't ask if I was okay. He looked up from the Oxford Companion to food, narrowed his eyes, and said, You were assaulted. Your powers of observation are as sharp as ever. You are bleeding on the rug. Kissed the Persian near his desk. Well, I muttered, add that to the invoice. He closed the book. Who to meet sculptures in tailored suits. Told me to drop the case. He frowned, which, in Wolfe terms, was the equivalent of full-blown fury, which means, I said, someone's getting nervous or desperate. Dana Lyle's death was not random. No, I said. She hesitated. On her alibi, couldn't name a cab company, which means she wasn't alone, Wolfe said. He tapped the edge of the book. Mr. Goodwin, find out who took her home, and if she won't talk. By sundown, I was haunting the curbside haunts of yellow taxis and private drivers. I flashed Dana's picture and asked about Celeste. 2 hours and 5 coffees later, I found a guy named Malik who remembered her. Yeah, he said, I drove. Her, she wasn't alone, described the man. Tall, thin, had a coat with elbow patches, looked nervous. Told me not to say anything. Did he give a name? No, but he tipped $20 on a $10 ride. I thanked Malik and took the info back to Wolfe. He listened without comment, then slowly said, coat with elbow patches. That scream academic to you? It whispers, Dr. Kroger. I blinked. You think they were together? I think Dana Lyell may have had more than one secret, and the threads are fraying. Himself, which he rarely did unless he suspected. His face changed only slightly. Then, I see. No, do nothing. I will send someone. He hung up and turned to me. Double quotes. Another body, he said. Kroger, shot in his apartment. Execution style. Correction, Wolfe said. He was our first. You know you're in for something strange when Nero Wolfe volunteers to have guests willingly. At lunch, no less. That meant one of two things. Either the house had been overrun by termites and he needed human noise to drown them out, or he was preparing to verbally crush someone like a walnut in December. I set the table. Wolfe watched. He was particular about the placement of cutlery, even for people he didn't intend to feed. Fritz hovered nearby, fussing with two separate platters, one of lamb and rice for Wolfe. Rang. I opened it to a trio of reluctant faces. Celeste Brand arrived first, all icy cheekbones and tension wrapped in perfume. Behind her slouched Mr. Holst, the gallery's manager, who looked like he hadn't slept since Dana's death. Bringing up the rear, with reluctant gallantry, was Elliot Fay, Dana Lyle's editor, who gave me the kind of look reserved for headwaiters who seat you near the kitchen, I trust. For truth, if nothing else, Celeste shot me a look that could curdle cream. Wolfe didn't rise when they entered. He never does. Instead, he gestured lazily at the chairs placed before his desk, like some ancient monarch preparing to hear complaints from the vassals. You are here, or someone connected to you has lied, and worse. Celeste crossed her arms. You think I murdered Dana? No, Wolfe replied, dabbing at his lips with a linen napkin. I think someone believes you know who did. Holst leaned forward. And that's why Kroger's dead. Not of a threat, but of a liability. He was unstable, afraid, and secrets, like cats, dislike being cornered. Elliot Fay finally spoke. This is absurd. You think this is a parlor game? No, Wolfe said. But I do think the killer would rather it were. Games, Mr. Fay, allow for rules. Crimes rarely do. I stood to the side, watching body language, filing away every twitch. Celeste's hands never stopped twisting in her lap. Holst blinked too often. Fay, though, sat like a statue, proud, unmoving, with the posture of a man used to controlling rooms through editorial silence. Wolfe set his fork down. Miss Brand, you did not return home alone that night. Her eyes narrowed. I never said you did not name the cab company. You hesitated. A painter who forgets detail is either lying or dying. I was afraid, she murmured. Of whom? I asked. She hesitated again. Of what people would think. Which people? That got no answer. Fay looked over at her, sharply, too sharply. I stepped forward. You weren't with Kroger that night. You were with someone else. Someone who tipped heavily and told the cabbie to forget what he saw. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Mr. Fay. The man arched an eyebrow. You were involved with Miss Brand. You argued with Lyle the night before his death. The receptionist overheard it. You said something about betrayal in print. Fay's face, previously carved from alabaster, cracked just slightly. I argued. Yes, he said. But I didn't kill him. Wolfe gestured mildly. Killing and arguing are different acts, but they are often married by motive. Holst cleared his throat. Why would Fay kill Kroger? Because Kroger knew, Wolfe replied, and threatened to tell. The silence was dense. You could have smothered a trumpet in it. Wolfe leaned back. I do not accuse. Yet, Fay stood up. This is a waste of time. Not for the dead, Wolfe murmured, when the guests finally left, like schoolchildren who'd failed their recitation. Wolfe rang for beer, I said, sipping. Likely, Wolfe admitted, but not certain. Miss Brand protects him, and for now, that binds us. What next? Wolfe sipped, then closed his eyes. We watch them squirm. Someone will blink. or a tense interrogation. But while I was halfway through a pastrami sandwich at Lonnie's Deli, it was 3:15 p.m., and I had taken a tactical retreat to feed myself, while Wolfe sulked among his orchids and sorted out the ethics of accusing Elliot Fay without all the required chess pieces. Finished buttering the second half of my sandwich when my phone buzzed. Not the landline at the office, not the secure line, just my regular cellular, which, according to my rules, was reserved for cab dispatchers, women with long lashes, and people trying to sell me car insurance. It was Inspector Kramer Goodwin, he barked, without even a hello. Kramer, I said, matching his tone. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you've come around to Wolfe's charms and want to take him to dinner. Shut up and listen. Manuscript wasn't a novel. It was a memoir, a real one. Names changed, but the guts intact. I paused, mid-bite. Memoir of what? Get this. It outlined a string of extramarital affairs, and one extremely specific bribery accusation involving an art endowment and a city councilman named Russell Haverly. Gasoline and a match. There's more, Kramer growled. The publisher's office was broken into last night. Someone went through the manuscript safe. Nothing was taken officially, but Fay's assistant says a box was open that shouldn't have been. The unpublished Lyle draft. Exactly. I paid my bill, tipped Lonnie generously, and was back at the brownstone in 15 minutes. Was reading a monograph on 17th century Romanian cookery when I came in. He didn't even look up. You reek of mustard and discovery, he said. I handed him my notepad. Read, digest, and if you don't mind, allow yourself a moment of smug satisfaction. Monograph, and sighed deeply. A memoir, he said. I should have seen it. The manuscript was the lever, not the fulcrum. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning, he said, that the crime was not about Lyle himself, but about what he knew? Someone wanted that draft buried or rewritten. He nodded. Yes, but the crude nature of the break-in suggests urgency and fear, hardly the habits of a seasoned blackmailer. His name appears in that draft, even thinly disguised. His career would be reduced to ash, and Fay protects the manuscript, profits from controversy, and might have motive to leak or suppress and misbrand. Wolfe frowned. There, I am less certain. A human question mark with a haircut like a hay bale and hands made of silk and secrets. He knocked on the office door around 5:45 that evening, unusual in itself. Excuse me, Mr. Wolfe, he said. Someone asking for Archie. Someone, Wolfe, Kroger's daughter. She didn't say only that it was urgent. She's in the orchid room. Wolfe scowled. The orchid room. She let herself in, Theodore said, almost apologetically. Wolfe groaned, then waved me off like a fly. Lucia Kroger looked nothing like I expected. Early 30s, olive-skinned, sharp-eyed. She wore a slate-gray coat and gripped the lapel, like it held back a scream. She had the look of someone who'd lost patience with grief and was now just angry. Mr. Goodwin, she said, when I entered. Your employer believes my father's death was murder. That's not a belief, I said. It's the working theory. Well, she said, I have something to add to it. She reached into her handbag and produced a torn page. Not a photocopy, not a typeset galley, but a handwritten sheet, in looping, familiar cursive. Dana Lyles. At the bottom, a signature. I scanned the page. It was short, a sort of preface. But what it said nearly knocked the air out of me. This is not fiction. I will call her Celeste, though that is not her name. I will say she loved me, though that is not quite true. I will say she never lied, but that would be the greatest lie of all. What is this? I asked. A page from the original draft, Lucia said. He gave it to my father the night before he died. Said it was the only thing that mattered if anything happened to him. Why not give the whole manuscript? Because he didn't trust the publisher, or his editor, or anyone. But he trusted my father. Dana was his patient and his friend. Why bring it now? Because someone followed me yesterday. A man in a blue sedan. I saw him again this morning. Back in the office. Wolfe held the page up to the light. No watermark, he said. But the ink is recent. This is not a fabrication. So now we know Lyle feared something, I said. No, Wolfe corrected. We now know that Lyle knew something, and that he entrusted it to Dr. Kroger, who was then silenced. He turned to me, double quotes, Archie, invite everyone back, all of them. For 7:30 dinner, I asked. Revelation, he said. The killer has outpaced themselves. Now they will fall behind. By 6:15 that evening, Nero Wolfe had vanished into his greenhouse, presumably to commune with his orchids and give the world and me some space to catch its breath. That was the thing about Wolfe. When he neared the end of a mental labyrinth, he retreated, not to sharpen a weapon, but to let the weapon of his mind cool, so that it could cut cleaner when it returned. I, on the other hand, was stuck at my desk, flipping through notes, watching the clock tick toward 7:30, and wondering whether Fritz was going to cook something for our guests that would impress or intimidate, or both. Fritz Brenner, our house chef and resident culinary wizard, appeared at the door of the office with the serene expression of a man who could poach an egg blindfolded while reciting Racine. Archie, he said, with a small bow, Mr. Wolfe has asked that I prepare canops, nothing hot. He says the temperature of the room must be kept steady. That's very thoughtful of him, I replied. We wouldn't want murder interrupted by soup. Fritz smiled politely and disappeared again at 6:45. I went to the plant rooms. You don't just go into Wolfe's orchids. You announce your presence like a visitor at Versailles. There is a ritual, a rhythm. First the hallway door, then the inner door, then the careful steps between benches, blooming with $1,000 blossoms that Wolfe treats better than most humans. Theodore. Horstman was spraying a specimen, a pale cattleya with purple-veined petals that looked like gossip, frozen mid-whisper, busy. Evening, I said. Theodore gave a nervous nod. Mr. Wolfe asked me to prepare the blooms for viewing. He said they should be at their peak. I raised an eyebrow. Viewing for who? He didn't say, but he adjusted the heat to 22.6 degrees. Wolfe's exactitude when preparing a trap would put most military operations to shame. I turned to leave, then paused. Theodore. Yesterday you said Lucia Kroger entered the orchid room unannounced. That's unusual. Yes. He hesitated, hands buried in sphagnum moss. Yes, very. Did she say anything strange? She said, they always bloom on time. Then she asked me whether Wolfe believed in evil. That gave me pause. What did you tell her? I told her evil was a category, not a condition. I gave a low whistle. You've been reading Wolfe's philosophy books again. He nodded shyly. By 7:15. The brownstone was beginning to buzz. Miss Brand arrived first. punctual, pressed, and pretending not to be anxious. Her mouth was taut, and her scarf knotted like a noose. Elliot Fay showed next, all lacquered smile and patent leather hair. If I had to bet on who'd pack a flask into a publisher's pocket, he'd be my man. Russell Haverly sent a note instead, unable to attend, regretfully indisposed. Wolfe read the note once, handed it back to me without comment, and continued arranging chairs in a semicircle around the office rug. He had removed his yellow silk robe for the occasion, opting for a dark brown suit that gave him the look of a banker about to foreclose on someone's soul. "Is this the trap?" I asked. "It is not a trap," he said. "It is a mirror." That was all he said, and in wolf speak, that was practically an aria. Fritz brought in the tray of canapes precisely at 7:28. Toasted rye squares with cucumber and dill, smoked salmon curls on triangles of brioche, something with quince. Didn't bother identifying champagne, he asked Wolfe. "Apple cider," Wolfe replied. "No spirits. I require clarity." We all sat. Wolfe waited a full minute before speaking, letting silence become weight. Then he turned to Miss Brand. "Miss Brand, your real name is not Angela, is it?" She blinked. "Excuse me. Your father was the Rev. Oliver Brand of Whitechapel. He died in 1972. Your legal name is Celeste Brand." Her lips parted, but no words came. "I only mention it," Wolfe said mildly, "because Dana Lyle's manuscript refers repeatedly to a woman named Celeste, a pseudonym, he claimed. But your past, carefully hidden, matches her precisely. The age, the relationship, the departure, the anger." Her hand went to her mouth. "You have no proof." "I don't need proof," Wolfe interrupted. "Only the truth, and it is this. You were Lyle's lover. You helped him write that memoir, then tried to destroy it." Fay stood, face flushed. "This is absurd." "It is not," Wolfe said, turning to him. "You saw the storm coming. The memoir would ruin your authors, your allies. Haverly's career, you tried to suppress it, through edits, through delay, through sabotage." Fay stepped back. Wolfe continued, "But someone else went further." He turned to Lucia Kroger. "You gave us the page your father received, a page Dana gave him in fear. But you omitted something, that you read it before the police arrived, and you recognized the handwriting." Lucia's face remained calm. Wolfe leaned forward. "You knew the killer, because it was you." The room went still. Lucia Kroger didn't flinch. The accusation, dropped like a chess piece onto a nearly finished board, made no ripple across her features. Wolfe sat motionless in his chair, eyes narrowed, fingertips pressed together like they always were when he knew something you didn't, and intended to punish you with it. "I think," she said, her voice even, "you're very good at your game, Mr. Wolfe, but you're wrong." "No, Miss Kroger," Wolfe replied. "I am not. You think I murdered Dana Lyle." Her brow lifted. "That I gave my own father a page from his manuscript as a warning. That I stabbed Dana and then ran to the police with crocodile tears and photocopies." Wolfe didn't speak. "So I did, Miss Kroger," I said. "It's not the page we're stuck on. It's the ink." Wolfe had it tested. Not just the signature, but the smudge. It came from a ribbon you own. An Olympia typewriter, early 60s model. Yours sits in your apartment. The ribbon you used wasn't commercially sold after 1984. Her silence was more telling than a gasp might have been. "That means," I continued, You typed the page yourself, not Dana. You typed it to look like Dana and planted it in your father's desk after he was killed. So we'd find it. So we'd chase the wrong story. Lucia stared at me, then turned to Wolfe. Why would I do that? You tell me, he said. She rose from her chair with a sharp inhale, and for a moment I thought she might storm out or slap someone. But what she did was far stranger. She smiled. You are so sure, Mr. Wolfe, so absolutely confident. And it's charming, really. But here's something you missed. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thin envelope, neatly sealed. I didn't come here tonight to defend myself. I came to surrender. Wolfe didn't blink. I raised an eyebrow. She handed the envelope to me. I opened it and read aloud. To whom it may concern. Yes, I typed the page. I knew what it would look like. I knew what it would do. But I didn't kill anyone. Dana Lyell died because he went too far with the wrong people. The memoir was a trap. Not for me. Not for Angela Brand. But for someone with the power to erase lives. I hoped the page would distract you long enough for me to vanish. I failed. You can keep this, but don't say I didn't warn you. Lucia Kroger. There was silence. Then Wolfe, said Archie. Burn it, I blinked. Sir, I said, burn it. That's evidence. No, it is artifice. A false confession wrapped in a riddle. She did not write that to explain herself. She wrote it to obscure someone else. Lucia sat down again, composed, calculating. So, she said, who do you think I'm protecting? Wolfe didn't answer. Angela Brand did. She's protecting Russell Haverly. Everyone turned to her. I saw them, twice, in his car, outside the Columbia Club. She pretended it was a business meeting, but it wasn't. Lucia didn't deny it. Fay looked like he'd swallowed his own cravat. Oh, come on, he muttered. I should have guessed it sooner, Wolfe said. Haverly was the key. Lyell didn't threaten him with truth. He threatened him with exposure. Haverly's connections, his clients, his past dealings with intelligence circles in the late 70s. It all would have come apart, Lucia whispered. You don't know what you're saying. But Wolfe did. And Dana Lyell knew it too. He wasn't writing a memoir. He was writing a blackmail ledger. The names weren't changed. The dates were accurate, and Haverly paid to keep it buried. I said, so why did he kill him now? Because Lyell was going to publish it anyway. He had offers from 2 other presses. The moment Haverly heard, he acted, or had someone act for him. Angela Brand nodded, eyes wide. He told me not to come to the house that night. She said he'd handle it himself. Lucia stared at the floor, her shoulders stiff. Then you've got your murderer, she said. It wasn't me, but Wolfe remained silent. That was what told me the case wasn't quite cooked yet, because if Wolfe had solved it, he'd already be halfway into a bottle of beer and humming to himself. Instead, he said, Miss Kroger, you've given us a false trail, but not to save Haverly. You did it to keep yourself from being next. Lucia looked up, startled. Someone else is pulling these strings, Wolfe said. And the moment we know who, we'll stop being their puppets. You'd think, after working with Nero Wolfe for as long as I have, I'd have developed some kind of psychic link, a sixth sense, for when he was about to spring one of his patented, mind-bending traps. But no, Wolfe remains Wolfe. And when he starts rearranging the world in his head, you're just another pawn on his board until the endgame begins. It started with silence. Wolfe didn't talk much the next day. No lectures about my penmanship, no complaints about the ashtray on the side table. Just long hours in the plant room with Theodore and the orchids, punctuated by brief, murmured phone calls I wasn't allowed to overhear. I asked him twice, okay, 4 times, what the plan was. He only answered once, and all I got was, the fish cannot know the hook until it is already too late. So I waited. It was Friday afternoon when he finally summoned me into the office. Archie, he said, we're inviting guests to dinner. Not the usual variety, I assume. No. You will call Miss Kroger, Miss Brand, Mr. Haverly, and Mr. Fay. Inform them that I have come to a decision in the matter of Dana Lyle's murder. They are to be present at 7 o'clock this evening, promptly. Am I cooking? Fritz will prepare a cold table, and the wine will be there. I whistled. That's optimistic. No, it is deliberate. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The subtlety of a cold table is often underestimated in situations where nerves are raw. Let them eat in silence. Let them wonder. Then we strike. Do I get to know what we're striking with? He cracked one eye open. No. At 7 sharp, they arrived. The full cast, dressed in the uniforms of the guilty and the almost guilty tailored coats. Cautious expressions. Perfume applied too deliberately. Lucia Kroger came first, alone. Her lips taut and her eyes scanning every detail of the room as if looking for something. Wolfe had moved since her last visit. Angela Brand arrived 5 minutes later, wearing dark silk and a face that didn't quite know whether to be composed or desperate. Russell Haverly showed up precisely on time. As all men with secrets often do, they believe punctuality is a shield. And finally, the wrinkled mess of Gregory Fay shuffled in last, muttering about traffic, elevators, and something about being harassed by orchids. Dinner was subdued. Wolfe didn't speak a word until Fritz cleared the final dish. Then, with that rumbling gravity of his, he said, "Ladies, gentlemen, I thank you for your patience. The matter before us, the death of Dana Lyall, has troubled me, not least because it offended my sense of logic. Murder is a grotesque act, but even the grotesque must follow a pattern. Tonight, I offer that pattern to you." The room went still. "Mr. Haverly," Wolfe began, "you lied about your whereabouts the night Dana Lyle died. You claimed you were at the River Club, but surveillance places your car 3 blocks from the Lyell residence at 9:47 p.m. Jaw twitched. "That's absurd. Surveillance. Yes, a traffic camera, obscured, but identifiable by plate and model. This is illegal." "No," Wolfe said. "It is deduction. The camera was public. The deduction is mine." Angela Brand leaned forward. "So he was there?" "Yes," Wolfe replied. "But he didn't kill Lyall." Now that turned heads. Wolfe didn't flinch. He went there to retrieve something. A copy of the manuscript, a note, a photograph, something he believed would compromise him. But Lyell was already dead when he arrived. "Then who?" Brand began. "Miss Kroger," Wolfe interrupted, "believed it was you. She set the false confession trail to point toward you, to buy herself time. But the truth is simpler and older." Wolfe turned his gaze to Gregory Fay. "You killed Dana Lyall." The air shifted. Gregory Fay didn't blink, didn't even sigh. He just reached for his wine, took a sip, and said, "Prove it." Wolfe smiled. "And I knew the show was really about to start. I don't have to. You already did. He pulled a small envelope from the drawer and handed it to me. Read, Archie. I opened it and read, to Mr. Wolfe, I believe I owe you honesty. I was at the Lyell residence the night he died. Dana had written something about my father. Something untrue. At least, I hope it was untrue. I confronted him. I slapped him, but I didn't kill him. When I left, he was alive. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid. I didn't want to be next. Lucia, she sent this, Wolfe said, because she realized the killer wasn't who she thought. She realized the page she planted to protect herself implicated the wrong man, and she feared the right one was. Still watching, Lucia stood up, trembling. It's true. I saw Gregory leaving the house from across the street. I thought nothing of it until later. I thought he was just ... visiting. Faye sneered. This is pathetic, Wolfe said. No, Mr. Faye, it is justice. You were Lyell's editor for decades. You protected him, yes, but also owned him. The memoir was the first time he wrote something you couldn't control, I added. And the Lavender room was your sanctuary, your one place without compromise. You hated that he used it. You felt betrayed. Faye's voice dropped. He ruined everything, everything. That book would have dragged us both into the fire. So you killed him, Wolfe concluded. Faye didn't speak. But the way he slumped, the way his hands trembled, it didn't need words. I called Inspector Kramer 10 minutes later. If you've never been present for a Nero Wolfe inquisition in the office, the real thing, with suspects lined up like ducks in a shooting gallery, let me assure you, it's more than just talk. It's theater. It's electricity without wires. The walls feel tighter, the chairs more brittle, and the air smells like something big about to break. The suspects, or let's call them what they are now, accomplices, accessories, and the almost innocent, were arranged in their preferred order of discomfort. Lucia Kroger perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, like a schoolteacher ready to correct someone's grammar at gunpoint. Angela Brand curled into her chair, arms folded like armor, breath shallow but regular. And then there was Gregory Faye. He sat not quite centered in the red leather chair reserved for guests who didn't know yet they were being roasted alive. His cane rested against the desk, and though he had made no formal confession the night before, Wolfe had seen to it that he stayed overnight, not under arrest, not detained, merely obliged to be available. The morning before issuing any warrants, that was Wolfe's rule. You see, never go to the cops with a truth that wasn't yet complete. And Wolfe, damn him, never served it cold. He opened the office proceedings with barely a glance up from his chair. You will pardon the bluntness of this exercise, he said, but time is short, and justice is patient only until noon. Nobody responded, which was smart. Mr. Faye, Wolfe said, folding his hands over his stomach. You maintain that you did not murder Dana Lyell, and yet your fingerprints were on a glass in the Lavender room. That, in itself, is not damning. However, the glass bore traces of laudanum. Faye's voice rasped. He stole from me all the time. Dana was a habitual invader. You told the police you hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. I lied, Faye said flatly. So did he, probably. Are we done? Hardly. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, which, in Wolfe terms, meant he was drawing his intellectual dagger. The laudanum wasn't the cause of death, he said, with a copy of the memoir in his lap and the fireplace roaring. You killed the book and the man. Lucia gasped softly. Angela flinched. Faye remained stone. I know this, Wolfe said, because you told me so. In your own way. The lavender room was, you said, never meant for words like his. You didn't just kill Dana Lyell, you erased him. I don't see a jury in here, Faye said, voice quieter now. Is this a trial or theater? I got up, crossed to the drawer in the hallway cabinet, and pulled out the envelope Wolfe had instructed me to seal the night before. Who raised it in the air? This, he said, is a picture taken by Dana Lyell's assistant, Mr. Clark, 1 week before the murder. It shows the lavender room intact, the original manuscript pages on the table, the decanter of laudanum clearly half full. He passed it to me. I held it up for the room. Now, Wolfe said, compare it to the police's post-mortem inventory. The decanter was empty. But no laudanum was detected in Lyell's stomach, only on his lips and in his saliva. That means he was dosed just before the fatal blow, and the rest was poured down the drain afterward. I stepped aside and let the silence do its work. Wolfe delivered the final thrust. The only person with access to both the room and the drug and the motive to destroy what Lyell had written was you, Mr. Faye. For the first time, Faye sagged. Do you know what it said? He asked quietly. What said? I asked. The memoir. Wolfe shook his head. Faye gave a bitter smile. He named names. Mine. Others. Nothing provable. Nothing legal. Just stories. Gossip made flesh. He would have ended 6 careers. And you chose, Wolfe said, to preserve the dead over the living. I chose silence, Faye said, and I'll accept the price. We waited 5-10 seconds. Then I moved toward the phone. Time to call Kramer. Wolfe nodded. Yes, inform him Mr. Faye will surrender himself at his convenience. When Gregory Faye finally stood, it was with the slow elegance of a man who'd rehearsed his exit 100 times, just never allowed. No dramatics, no screaming innocence, and certainly no attempts to bolt. Faye wasn't that kind of criminal. He was the other kind. The kind that came in tailored suits and left in cuffs that didn't quite match the trousers. I knew it, Angela Brand whispered, barely above a breath. Her hands clutched the arms of her chair like the verdict had pressed weight onto her. Ribs. Lucia Kroger said nothing. She just stared, not at Faye, but at Wolfe, as though trying to understand the gears behind his judgment. Russell Haverly looked almost disappointed and addressed us all, not just Wolfe, not just me, but everyone in the room, like a man offering closing arguments for a life that would never make the papers. There was a time, he said, when words had weight, a time when publishing meant truth, or at least the pursuit of it. Dana Lyell was a writer once, a real one. He told stories that made you think, that kept your stomach in knots long after you closed the book. He got greedy, lazy. He started enjoying the smell of scandal more than the sound of a good sentence. The memoir was his confession, but it was also his revenge. Every enemy, every grudge, all of it wrapped in that nauseating prose he'd convinced himself was art. I read it. I read every word, and when I finished, I realized if the world read it too, he'd get exactly what he wanted. Silence, immortality. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I preferred him dead. Wolfe didn't even blink. Faye placed his cane back on the rug, aligning it carefully with the heel of his shoe. I accept whatever judgment the state deems fit, he said, turning toward the door. You won't need handcuffs, Mr. Goodwin. And Kramer's anticipation meant this wasn't a surprise, just a formality. By the time I got back up to the office, the others had gone. Even Fritz, who'd hovered in the kitchen pretending not to listen, had vanished into the cellar to alphabetize preserves, or whatever Fritz did when he was thinking. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed. The events of the past week, I must admit, he murmured. I will miss him, Faye. Yes, a loathsome man, but not an uninteresting one. High praise. Wolfe opened one eye. He committed a terrible act, but he did so with clarity, of purpose. One doesn't often find that in this city. I flopped into the red chair opposite his desk. Well, the city can breathe again. One less literary sociopath on the loose. You jest, but that's not inaccurate. There was a pause. Then, Archie, yeah, you performed adequately. Why, thank you, your immensity. To me, since you found out I'd used your orchid mist to clean my glasses, that was sabotage, not praise. I grinned. He didn't. But as I stood to leave, I noticed something odd. Wolfe didn't reach for a book. Beer. He didn't even summon Fritz. He just sat there, staring at the orchids through the glass door like they might wilt under the weight of the world he'd just nudged back into balance. You okay, boss? Wolfe blinked. Of course. I merely wonder how many truths are still buried in rooms like that one. He gestured vaguely to the city, or perhaps to the Lavender room itself, and then he closed his eyes. The day after Gregory, since Wolfe cornered him with all the grace of a chess master, moving his rook to checkmate, the papers didn't say much. Literary agent charged in author's death. Not exactly ink that. Scream's bestseller. Wolfe, of course, refused all interviews. He had Fritz inform reporters that Mr. Wolfe was indisposed, which, to be fair, he technically was. His morning schedule had been interrupted by the delivery of a new Peruvian hybrid, orchid, and he considered that the only development of public interest, the Lavender room at Verity Press, closed indefinitely. Lucia Kroger inherited Dana Lyle's royalties and left New York 2 days later. Angela Brand went back to writing fluff pieces on architectural minimalism for modern living. Russell Haverly managed to secure a temporary gig ghostwriting celebrity memoirs. And as for Faye, and the Lavender room was your San. Your one place without compromise. You hated that he used it. You felt betrayed. Faye's voice dropped. He ruined everything. Everything. That book would have dragged us both into the fire. So you killed him, Wolfe concluded. Faye didn't speak. But the way he slumped, the way his hands trembled, it didn't need words. I called Inspector with suspects. Lined up like ducks in a shooting gallery. Let me assure you, it's more than just talk. It's theater. The walls feel tighter, the chairs more brittle. Lucia Kroger perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, like a schoolteacher, ready to correct someone's grammar at gunpoint. Breath shallow but regular. And then there was. His cane rested against the desk, and though he had made no formal confession the night before, Wolfe had seen to it that he stayed overnight, not under arrest, not detained, merely obliged to be available. I'd asked Kramer to give us the morning before issuing any warrants. That was Wolfe's rule. Chair, you will pardon the bluntness of this exercise. Nobody responded, which was smart, Mr. Fay, Wolfe said, folding his hands over his stomach. Your fingerprints were on a glass in the lavender room. That in itself is not damning. However, the glass bore traces of laudanum. Faye's voice rasped. He stole from me all the time. Dana was a habitual invader. You told the police you hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, which in Wolfe terms meant he was drawing his intellectual dagger. The laudanum wasn't the cause of death, he said, but it ensured Dana Lyell would not fight back when you struck him. You drugged him, then posed him with a copy of the memoir in his lap and the fireplace roaring. You killed the book and the man. Angela flinched. Faye remained stone. I know this, Wolfe said, because you told me so. In your own way. I don't see a jury in here, Faye said, voice quieter now. Is this a trial or theater? Archie, Wolfe said without turning, you may now retrieve the last piece. I got up, crossed to the drawer in the hallway cabinet, and pulled out the envelope Wolfe had instructed me to seal the night before. A picture taken by Dana Lyell's assistant, Mr. Clark, 1 week before the murder. It shows the lavender room intact, the original manuscript pages on the table, the decanter of laudanum clearly half full. He passed it to me. I held it up for the room. Now, Wolfe said, compare it to the police's post-mortem inventory. The decanter was empty. That means he was dosed just before the fatal blow, and the rest was poured down the drain afterward. Drug and the motive to destroy what Lyell had written was you, Mr. Faye. Wolfe shook his head. Faye gave a bitter smile. He named names. And you chose, Wolfe said, to preserve the dead over the living. Time to call Kramer. Wolfe nodded. Yes, inform him Mr. Faye will surrender himself at his convenience. When Gregory Faye finally stood, the kind that came in tailored suits and left in cuffs that didn't quite match the trousers, I knew it, Angela Brand whispered, barely above a breath. Ribs. Lucia Kroger said nothing. She just stared, not at Faye, but at Wolfe, as though trying to understand the gears behind his judgment. Russell Haverly looked almost disappointed, as if the theater had ended before he'd finished his popcorn. Faye adjusted his coat. May I say one final thing, Mr. Wolfe? Wolfe nodded once, curtly. Gregory Faye stepped into the center of the office and addressed us all, not just Wolfe, not just me, but everyone in the room, he said, when words had weight. A time when publishing meant truth, or at least the pursuit of it. Dana Lyell was a writer once, a real one. He took a slow breath, but he got greedy, lazy. He started enjoying the smell of scandal more than the sound of a good sentence. Himself was art. I read it. I read every word. And when I finished, I realized if the world read it too, he'd get exactly what he wanted. Silence. Immortality. Wolfe didn't even blink. Faye placed his cane back on the rug, aligning it carefully with the heel of his shoe. I accept whatever judgment the state deems fit. You won't need handcuffs, Mr. Goodwin. Don't flatter me, I replied. Kramer brings his own. Wolfe's reputation and Kramer's anticipation meant this wasn't a surprise. Even Fritz, who'd hovered in the kitchen, pretending not to listen. The events of the past week, I must admit, he murmured. I will miss him. Of purpose. One doesn't often find that in this city. One less literary sociopath on the loose. You performed adequately. Why, thank you. Your immensity. That's the nicest thing you've said. To me, since you found out I'd used your orchid mist to clean my glasses. That was sabotage, not praise. I grinned. He didn't. But as I stood to leave, I noticed something odd. Wolfe didn't reach for a book. He didn't ask for beer. He didn't even summon Fritz. He just sat there. I merely wonder how many truths are still buried in rooms like that one. Fay turned himself in, and I used the term generously, since Wolfe cornered him with all the grace of a chess master moving his rook to checkmate. The papers didn't say much. Not exactly ink that screams bestseller. Wolfe, of course, refused all interviews. Orchid. And he considered that the only development of public interest, the Lavender Room at Verity Press, closed indefinitely. Lucia Kroger inherited Dana Lyle's royalties and left New York 2 days later. G.I.G. ghostwriting celebrity memoirs. And as for Fay, tied with one of Wolfe's fattest verbal ribbons. But not all threads end up neatly tied. There were 2 things about the whole affair that never quite sat right with me. First, why Dana Lyle had actually invited me to his apartment the night he died. He claimed it was to show me something, but he never said what. We never found a manuscript, no safe, no letter, just the final copy of his tell-all, marked up with circles around certain names and notes like buried too deep and no forgiveness. My theory, he knew what he'd written could get him killed. And maybe, just maybe, he was trying to leave a breadcrumb for someone with a long enough stride. Second, and more curious still, was Wolfe's reaction once it was over. He didn't return to his usual gluttonous calm. 4 days afterward, he was short-tempered, barely spoke during meals. All I got was, there are depths, Archie, even in literature, where men bury not just secrets, but their souls. Even for him. But I've learned not to press too hard. Sometimes Wolfe's silences are louder than his lectures. That Friday, in the plant rooms, mumbling to his orchids about the difference between discipline and indulgence, which I'm pretty sure was actually a commentary on me. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the office. The empty red chairs, the scent of sandalwood still lingering in the rug, the quiet hum of Fritz preparing dinner down the hall. I thought of all the voices that had filled that space over the past week, the lies, the confessions, the way every suspect had come into this brownstone thinking they could talk their way past a man who rarely left his own front door. They never learn. And I said, "Yes, thank you, Archie," meaning you'll be pleasant company again. I was never unpleasant. Only in the way stone gargoyles are unpleasant. They don't talk much, and they're hard to move. He snorted, which in wolf speak was practically an embrace. I left him to the orchids. There's a rhythm to life at 2-to-1 Sorry, wrong. Detective, let me rephrase that. There's a rhythm to life at Wolfe's brownstone. Clients come, bodies fall, words twist, truths snap taut, and in the middle of it, Nero Wolfe sits unmoved, unbent, unsparing, and me. I write it all down, dodge the bullets, and occasionally get the girl. Sometimes that's all the justice you get in New York. The knock came just after 10 on Sunday morning, which is generally considered holy time at the brownstone, not for religious reasons, but because it falls between Wolfe's orchid maintenance and the first glass of beer. I was halfway through the crossword, and Fritz was prepping veal kidneys when I heard it. 3 raps, deliberate and unfamiliar. Wolfe was in the plant room. I figured it was a delivery man with more orchid fertilizer, or someone wanting a donation for a church Wolfe didn't belong to. Instead, it was Lucia Kroger, or rather, formerly Lucia Kroger. She looked different, hair shorter, jacket sharper, a new confidence in her shoulders, like someone just came back this morning. "May I speak to Mr. Wolfe?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is this business or pleasure?" "Neither," she said. "Well, you can't say no to that, especially not when it's delivered like a line from a forgotten Chandler novel." Wolfe agreed to see her, not because he wanted to, he never wants to, but because he was curious. And when Wolfe's curious, even the orchids get ignored. She sat where Dana had once sat, in the red chair opposite Wolfe. Her hands were bare, now no rings, no pen, and her eyes didn't flick away when he looked at her. "I owe you both a thank you," she said plainly. "And I suppose a confession." "I suggest you don't. I dislike do-overs." "It's not that," she said. "It's just that, well, you were right about Dana's book. There were more names, deeper ones." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Go on." He showed me a page, just one. It was about Gregory Fay, about something that happened in Berlin before the war. Or he never said it aloud. "But I think that's why Gregory snapped." Wolfe grunted. "Then I suspect Mr. Fay may still be hiding things that concern more than publishing." She nodded. "I thought you should know before someone else decides to dig." Wolfe didn't answer right away. Then he said, "And you, Miss Kroger, are you planning to dig?" "No, I'm going to write." "Desk." He waited until she left before touching it. Inside was a single sentence on cream-colored stationery. "There are other rooms." That evening, Wolfe filed the letter in a folder labeled Lyle Kroger, slipped it behind the orchids in his wall safe, and locked the door with more force than usual. I didn't ask him what it meant. Some things, especially in Wolfe's world, are best left unopened. I've typed up a lot of files in my day, poisonings in pen, but every now and then one lands in the cabinet that leaves more questions than answers. In his world, cases are either solved or not worth solving. Ambiguity is for poets and politicians. He just stared at the folder for a long time, like it was humming at a frequency only he could hear. Are we ever going to talk about what Lucia's note meant? Which, in Wolfspeak, meant he had formed a conclusion so firm that any additional conversation would be considered vulgar repetition. "You think there's another list, don't you?" I tried. "A bigger one. A real one. Something Dana never published." "I don't think," Wolfe replied. "I know." He poured himself a bottle of brown sherry and sipped it like it was distilled enlightenment. "That envelope," he continued, "was a warning, not a confession, not an apology. A coded alert meant for anyone who might be foolish enough to go rifling through Dana Lyle's affairs." "Are you suggesting the names he printed were not the important ones? Then where?" Wolfe looked over his rim at me. "That, Mr. Goodwin, is precisely why we should never ask." I let that hang in the air while Fritz called us down for lunch. Duck à l'orange with a citrus glaze. Postprandial immobility. I took the liberty of adding my own personal note to the case file. He'd never see it. Wolfe doesn't read after-action musings unless they contain errors to correct. You'd better be ready to ask, who painted the walls and why? Sometimes the crime isn't in the murder. Sometimes it's in the silence that follows. And every now and then, even Nero Wolfe chooses not to speak. AG.